Today's episode is brought to you by the Vegas Beer Guys and the Sounds in Cinema podcast. The Everything Sequel podcast contains explicit language, and I will not go to my room. Hello and welcome to the Everything Sequel podcast. This is the Naked Gun edition. My name is Michael Shantz. I'm from the How Dare You Awards. With me, my partner in crime and your guru, Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. What do you have for us today, Tom?
I was surrounded by pimps, racists, and... I'll start again. Racist is what I'm thinking. Rapist was what I was trying to say. That's the first time I've ever needed a second take. Hang on.
That's true.
I was surrounded by pimps, rapists, and murderers. It was like being in the stands of a Los Angeles Raiders game.
Oh, fuck. Forgot about that line.
I use that line less for its comedic value and more for its kind of relevance to Southern California, where we are recording this podcast.
True.
Having been to a Los Angeles Raiders game, I feel this is the closest I get in this movie to understanding
I went
the
to
tone of it.
I went to a Los Angeles Raiders game. It had to be within a week or two of the Los Angeles riots.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, but both the Raiders and the Los Angeles riots feature in this movie.
Yes. As do Los Angeles City high schools, and I mean they're sparing no expense at the derision they're willing to sling in this movie.
Yeah, and there's really no sense of too soon.
No, exactly right.
Too soon has not entered these filmmakers' vocabularies.
Nope. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're of course talking about The Naked Gun. Actually, sorry, it's not just Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. This is a 1994 movie directed by Peter Sagal this time, Tom. Here are a list of here are a list of his other accomplishments. Tommy Boy, My Fellow Americans.
Okay.
Nutty Professor 2, Anger Management, The Longest Yard. More recently, Get Smart, Grudge Match, and My Spy.
That's fascinating because all those movies, bar one or two, are all sort of pitched at the same level of quality.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it's almost like his directorial presence on a movie is a sort of a guarantee of a
certain quality.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of too many direct. It's like it's not highs or lows. It's like we're never going to get above.
Middle of the road.
It's like we're never going to get above this line.
Right. Exactly.
Is what it's telling me.
We won't go below this line, but we're never also
people...
going to go above this line.
A lot of people speak up for Tommy Boy, certainly.
They do. More than any of the others, for sure.
More than any of the others. My fellow Americans. That's really interesting because I put this movie and that one in the same camp where, I'm far more enamored by the people involved in the movie than the movie itself.
So I am also far more enamored with the people in it and also with the idea. I loved the idea of My Fellow Americans. And I'm not going to say it was a terrible movie, but it just didn't it didn't reach my expectations of what I wanted for it.
You needed it to be made in the 60s with Billy Wilder.
Yeah, there you go.
And you could have the same cast. You could still have James Garner and Jack Lemmon, and it would be like one of the classics.
I suspect you are correct. Now, of our 3 Naked Gun movies, this is by far the least successful. They upped the budget this time. I mean, they upped it a lot. They went to $30 million on this one.
That's all on screen. I'm not. I mean, put to the wrong, put in the wrong direction, but it's up there on screen.
I'll give you that, yeah.
Yeah.
But opening weekend of 13.2, only 51.1 in the USA and the world. And
fatigue.
Yeah.
Franchise fatigue.
Just franchise fatigue.
Looking
Does
back
have
at it,
54% on Rotten Tomatoes, though, which I thought was high.
I think it's I don't think it's as. I think it's as high as you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So we're already getting into this. Is getting complicated, Rocco.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I don't. I wouldn't. I would maybe go like 10% lower than that.
Yeah. I was thinking
10%.
I was surprised it wasn't in the 39 to 45 range.
Oh, I would say 39 is too low. I wouldn't go lower than 45.
Well,
I think 45 to 55.
I have a feeling you like this movie a little more than I do.
I do.
Yeah.
It's not a feeling, it's true.
Oh.
And yet I guarantee you I will not dispute anything you say in the podcast.
Right.
It's one of those. I guarantee you that I will. I can. The reason why I think this is a bad movie and why ultimately it's a failure for me is because I think there are pretty much two sides to every successful joke in this movie. where I feel like even if the outcome of the joke is successful, I don't think the joke should be there. And the Raiders game
is a perfect
line
example.
Is almost the perfect example of that.
Well, that and when they do, I believe when they're breaking out of prison and they end up inside a Los Angeles City High School, right along the same lines. Because, of course, all the children at the high school have Uzis and shoot them, and they're gangsters.
Yeah, that's another great example. It's interesting, I feel like a lot of what there's we talked in the previous podcast about.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, because
two and a half. And like
how that movie ended?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
How successful the running gags were in that movie and the through lines. The comic through lines and the running gags were exemplary.
Sublime.
This movie doesn't have any running gags. It has running prejudices.
Yes.
Its jokes are organized around prejudicial themes. Chief among them, transphobia.
Yeah.
And I would say number 2 position is kind of either racism or misogyny. I'm still not decided.
They're on
that.
Equal par, probably. Yeah, exactly.
The fact that I'm not decided is beside the point.
It's not a good. Yeah, right.
The fact that I'm even having that debate means there's a problem here.
There's a problem in the movie. Correct.
So
well, and I think there are structural problems to this movie too.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree.
So, for instance, we talked in the last episode how there's no retconning or reason for why they're in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So to me, the funnier thing, but this movie's right back in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
To me, I think a running gag for all the movies should be new city every time.
Yeah,
go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Not LA, not DC. Now pick a new city.
A counter argument to that would be that because it's the third in a trilogy, there's they
wanted to do a fourth though, and they didn't because of the lukewarm reception to this movie.
That's interesting because I mean, not only is the word final, well, we know the final is not that never the final.
Come on, Tom.
So that's not a good.
How long have we been doing this?
Right. Okay. But I got the sense that that they wanted to do that thing where, whether it's to comment on this or whether they're just doing it organically because of where they are in the franchise, looping back to the original. Like bringing back the villain from the original, making this movie structurally like the original and how it's structured around.
I think you're playing fast and loose with the original villain.
Pap smear.
I get what you're saying, yes, but he's not our main villain from the first movie.
No, but I think he's brought back as a nod to the original movie.
Yeah, he is, absolutely.
I can see them doing that. However, unlike the second movie where I was always certain that they were parodying and pastiching these tendencies, I don't know. I don't get that from this movie.
Right.
That they're necessarily always on top of the cliche in the same way.
And here's I want to ask you this too. Fans of this podcast know that we have talked at length about the Tremors movies, and we at length talked about Tremors 2 Aftershocks and Fred Ward not being the right vehicle for the Tremors series.
Mm-hmm.
When you have your villains set up as Ricardo Montalban, and then you bring in Gould.
Gould?
What's that?
Goulet?
Oh, sorry. Goulet.
There is a Gould in this movie, but it's Elliot Gould.
Correct. So Goulet is the next person in line you think of Fred Ward?
No, not necessarily. But
so that was my other problem. I want a on par Goulet Montalban villain.
Right, except that given that they're doing a comedic pastiche of James Cagney's White Heat, he fits into that mold. Whether that's the right choice for the movie, and it probably isn't, is a different story.
That's all I'm saying. I don't think it's the right choice for the movie.
And it fits with the tradition of...
Again, big Fred Ward fan.
Yeah.
I just would have done something different for the movie.
One of these days we'll find a Fred Ward movie that uses Fred Ward well.
Remo Williams. Sadly, not a sequel.
Sadly, not a sequel.
It announced it would have a sequel. Never did.
But I like... I appreciated it in the tradition of casting the person who would be cast in the straight version of the same story.
Right, no.
Like I can if someone did like a made-for-TV remake of White Heat, you would probably put Fred Ward in it.
Sure.
So I appreciated it on that level. I agree with you that that shouldn't be our central villain by any means. He should be the henchman, as Anthony James was in the last. That's the role he's fitting into. Yeah. Why that's carrying the movie, I don't know. I mean, there's not much movie to carry.
Right.
I was gonna say that. I mean, this is shorter than the previous two movies, which don't go beyond 125.
Right.
It's also.
It also feels long to me.
Well, I was going to say that I like I'm very fond of the cold open, and also overall I like the closing set piece, but when I thought about the idea of a closing set piece, that doesn't really describe what is easily a third of the movie.
That's what yeah.
I mean, the third in Naked Gun 33 and the third is the Academy
Oscars
Awards
moment. Yeah, right.
So that's another factor here is there's one of the set pieces is over a third of the movie.
Well, I think because if you take the prison set piece as a whole, that's another third.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little more. It's like you have an Untouchables send up, followed by prison, followed by Oscar ceremony, roll credits.
What do you think of the Untouchables cold open?
Well, for one, I was surprised that, because I have not seen this movie since the theater.
I thought you were going to say you haven't seen The Untouchables. I was like,
Oh,
Mike,
God,
we may
no.
have to stop the podcast.
What are you talking, Tom? It's not like
Yeah.
you. I'm not like you, having not seen Stakeout or 48 Hours,
That's
like an
totally
insane
different.
person.
Totally different.
No, but I hadn't seen it since the theater, and I honestly could not believe, because I'm such a fan of The Untouchables,
Yeah.
that I had completely forgotten that front scene. Completely.
Interesting.
And as I was watching that front scene, I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong about thinking I didn't like this movie as much, because
Yeah, I know. I have
I'm
the same
enjoying
feeling.
this
Yeah,
immensely,
yeah.
you know?
Well, I'm glad you had that experience, because I really like that sequence. I've actually used that sequence in teaching before, on the differences between cinematic parody and pastiche, because it's a parody of a scene from a movie that is already a pastiche of another movie. So that scene in The Untouchables is recreate shots from Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin. So that's the pastiche version, and this is the parody version of that, where strollers are flying down the steps.
Once you get into the half a dozen strollers,
But
you're,
I also
you're
like
firmly
you know,
entrenched in parody.
I like the fact, and we talked a little about this in the previous podcast, that
Yeah.
it's just far enough in the past that it's
So, yeah.
become ripe for parody again.
And it's interesting you say that, because they originally had that idea for the second movie.
Yeah, that
And they
would make
did
way
not
more
think
sense.
and they did not think that they were far enough removed
Oh, good.
from the original movie, and so they just didn't do it.
And I thought, as apart from,
They also
you know,
thought, like, maybe not enough, even though Untouchables was a popular movie,
instant classic, really,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Yeah.
but they felt maybe enough people hadn't seen it yet
Oh, interesting.
for whatever reason. So that's why they you know, did not.
Well, that logic works for me. I also think it's a great way to reintroduce the central trio. Like, I think, and it's really the last time we get them as a central trio in the entire movie. So it's actually, I think, a really nice way to bring them back together. You know, and then there's this sort of stuff about it which is just interesting. It's not negative or positive. It's just interesting in terms of the franchise. Like, they really like celebrity impersonators in this franchise. Clinton and the Pope. And then there's the dark side of this. So one of my overall thoughts about this movie is that, like, I like two of the set pieces. I have more of
three.
More trouble with everything that's in between them, and
Yeah.
also some things that are in those set pieces.
Yeah.
And nothing really escapes. Nothing's uncontaminated here. And the fact that we're going straight in with mass shootings, with assault weapons.
Yeah, right.
You know, like, even in this kind of seemingly innocent movie parody, the film's already managing to offend people with disabilities, Latin Americans, and it ends with just a hint of how wrong this movie's gonna become, with O.J. Simpson catching babies as if they were footballs,
Yeah.
and then celebrating.
Right.
So this
Touchdown dance.
Even this great set piece, which is a great opening to the movie, has a real dark side that tells you more about what's about to come, I think.
Well, I cannot disagree with that. I tell you what, why don't we take our first break, and then we'll come back and we'll dive deeper into Naked Gun 33 1/3 right after this.
I like to think I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had one, maybe two craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live show about beer needs that same balance. And the Vegas Beer Guys matches beer expert Dan Aker with self-proclaimed beer novice Stephen J. Weiss. The results are eminently drinkable. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. They'll try new beers, they'll tell you about beer. Think of them as your beer Sherpas guiding you up a foamy-headed mountain to reach the peak of your pint. God, I need a beer.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Tom and I are here discussing Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. Tom, I feel like we should get something out of the way. I don't think we could talk about this movie, A, because it has O.J. Simpson, but B, because it also stars Anna Nicole Smith, without discussing the inherent tragedy surrounding these two people. I mean, O.J. Simpson's going to be in handcuffs, I think, 3 months after this movie comes out.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, maybe I'm remembering wrongly, but no, carry on. I've got a lot to say about how Naked Gun factors into the OJ tragedy, but I'll save that. Carry on.
Well, save it for what? What are you talking about?
Yeah, like what?
Come on, launch. What are you?
Okay. Well, I don't want. But I feel like, you know, this is, if you've yet to watch this movie, this is your
right.
This is your trigger warning.
Yeah.
Okay. You will be triggered in different ways by things that really have nothing to do with this movie as a piece of filmmaking.
Correct.
It's purely about who they've decided to cast.
Well, because you and I have already discussed that O.J. Simpson is better in this movie than the other two. Like, he's already coming into his own, comedy-wise.
Coming into his own and forming a really good comedy team with George Kennedy.
Right.
Like, really good.
I know.
Some of my favorite moments in this movie are the two of them working together. And, you know, while I love George Kennedy and Nielsen together, I kind of think that he and Norberg are a bit more of a natural fit as a double act. And I hate thinking all this.
Right.
Guys,
that's the thing. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Don't, you know, if you think, if it's like, why am I listening to this podcast that's standing up for O.J. Simpson? Purely in comedy terms, he's working really hard here and he's doing a great job.
I will not disagree.
One of my favorite moments in this movie, and this is just on this most recent viewing, when he and Ed, when Norberg and Ed drop by Frank Drebin's house to give him an assignment, and he says, you know, coffee. I said I just made cupcakes,
right.
And brings out some coffee, and Ed's like playing it down, like no, we just ate, we're fine. And then there's a perfectly timed pause. And then O.J. Simpson chimes up saying, "I'd like a cupcake.
I'd love a cupcake."
And that coffee smells really good. And it's just like, I laughed out loud, and I thought, wow, he's, and this is what made me think of that great documentary that we've already mentioned, O.J. Made in America.
Right.
One of the talking heads in that documentary, and I think it's actually one of his lawyers, or certainly someone who was involved in his case, I can't remember on each side, said that when he got up on the well, it wasn't on the stand, when he got up in court and tried to put the glove on that provided the basis for the defense's, you know, rebuttal of the case that was his glove, and he was miming trying to put it on and getting frustrated because it didn't fit.
Right.
I think the lawyer said it's like he was in pure Naked Gun mode there. And, you know, once you realize that these events are, you know, are like a year apart,
yeah,
you realize that you see the continuity between them. You see
that like makes it worse, doesn't it? Jesus.
It does. It's like the skills the kind of performance skills that he's building up here and that are in evidence.
Because in court, you would call what he was doing mugging for the camera.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like you have that horrible feeling without that comedy training ground of working with George Kennedy and Leslie Nielsen and the Zuckers and Abrams. Would he have been able to pull off that moment in court as well? And
right, because he's communicating to the jury. I mean, he's saying, "Not my fault, guys. Trying really hard doesn't fit. Not me. Just not me."
But for some reason, I mean, he's not just in this movie. He's in all of the Naked Guns. But for some reason, and I think I know why, this, not just its proximity to the actual events which he's most notorious for, I think I understand why this is harder to watch. Because that Made in America, one of the revelations of that movie to me was that the LA riots and the O.J. Simpson case were one and the same. Yeah. Like they are completely interconnected. And in this movie, you have both of those things. Both of those background stories play a part
in this movie, right?
So I think that's, in a sense, it's like it's not just the fact that it's O.J. Simpson with what we know about what will happen to him. Yes, the fact that that is coming very soon, but also the fact that it's against the background of the LA riots, which this movie explicitly discusses.
Yeah.
Disgustingly discusses on a number of occasions.
Yes, more than once.
That's why I have a harder time, you know, separating it. But you know, if you wanna just kind of completely turn off your moral compass for like an hour and a half, you would go.
It's not even. It's an hour and 14 minutes or so.
An hour and 14 minutes.
Yeah,
like, you'd be like, this is a fucking great performance. I don't care what he did. This is a great performance. Now, don't cut that bit out. Don't cut out the rest where I'm saying I feel bad about this. Don't just put that in the editing, okay?
I won't put you in the jackpot, I promise. Well, what about the other side of this coin with Anna Nicole Smith?
Well, I mean, she's less
notorious,
culpable, right? Like, the reason that you find O.J. Simpson's hard to watch is because you don't feel like you should be celebrating this man's successes.
Right.
With Anna Nicole Smith, it's just this... It just... Everything, I think, because it's so much about her objectification and, you know, treating her as a circus curiosity, almost. That,
yeah, you're right about that.
I just kind of feel, you know, I just feel sorry and bad for. Oh, she may have murdered her husband, but I believe that's part of the story too. As she may have actually murdered her husband, so I don't feel too sorry. But you know, there's just an air of tragedy around everything she does in the movie. Just a kind of general sadness.
Yeah.
Which I think if you cast another actress in that role, you could have done something really interesting with that part.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's funny because in the last movie, I mean, it's only a bit part, but the the woman who says, "What is this? Some kind of bust?"
Yeah, that you know who that is? That's
Yeah.
Henry Hill's girlfriend from Goodfellas,
Right.
whose name
And she
I
actually
can.
tragically died.
Oh,
She died shortly after that movie. She had a heart,
oh my God.
some sort of virus that went into her heart, and killed her.
Oh my
So we
God.
have tragedy all over these movies.
We're
But
doing comedy movies, people.
yeah, right. But my overall point was that particular
Rossi,
that
Janice Rossi.
in that scene, like that's a well-written joke. Is this some kind of bust? And he's playing, Leslie Nielsen's playing the straight hard-boiled cop who's looking at her in the eye and then looks down and says, "Well, yes, it's very impressive, but let's move on to other details."
Yeah.
And there's none of that
No.
for Anna Nicole Smith or this character in this movie. This movie's all at her expense.
All at her expense.
Yeah.
She's just a piece of meat. To play
And so in
off.
that way, the movie, it just feels less smart. It feels less, for lack of a better word, when we're talking about the Naked Gun movies, it's less sophisticated, comedy-wise,
Well, we've already said on a number of occasions that you need to be sophisticated about how stupid you're being.
Exactly.
Or it doesn't
right?
work.
Yeah.
But the one of the stark contrasts in these movies is like what they do with Priscilla Presley's character versus what they do with Anna Nicole Smith's character, because
Yeah, out of
even
nowhere,
in-
she's a lawyer.
right, well, yeah, there's that, and unfortunately, that's that this movie's just uncomfortable with women in the workplace.
Yeah.
So everything that's like progressive and vaguely feminist about women is a subject of derision.
Derision.
But beyond that, what I kind of mean, there's a number of moments where you can see like a stark contrast between how Anna Nicole Smith is being objectified by the camera and how they're almost refusing to do that with Priscilla Presley, even in the moments when the joke depends on that.
Mm-hmm.
Like the scene where she comes out in her lingerie, which is fitted with neon signs to all her genitals.
You're right.
Yeah. And lady parts. And
They have a
like,
back shot of her while she's clearly making her tassels fly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they do that with, I mean, it's obviously like, it's a dirty joke, but they do that with such respect for the actor. Like, she's not in a form-fitting piece of lingerie. That the joke is being sold because the joke is funny, not... And it's like, actually, we don't need her in, like, sexy lingerie. The joke works better if she's not in sexy lingerie.
If she's in ridiculous lingerie, yeah.
Exactly. And it just seemed to me that, like, yeah, that's where... And, I don't know if Priscilla Presley was, part of those decisions. I hope she was. But it certainly seems to me that, there's a double standard here. And one is the kind of right way to treat women on screen. Even when you're doing the kind of jokes that are about objectification, you can still do them in a way that doesn't involve victimizing the actual actor that's on screen.
Yeah.
And they know how to do that, and they did it in the last movie, and they did it in the movie before.
Right.
And they're doing it here with one of the actors, but not one of the others.
I know we're jumping around. What we haven't talked about at all in these movies is the opening credits car.
Yes.
I really like all the car stuff in this. The water slide, Star Wars, Jurassic Park.
Well, yeah, and it introduces.
And this movie does a lot with
effects.
But like with shit that came out the same year as it did. It's Jurassic Park, and more specifically Shawshank.
Yes.
I mean, it seems like they're doing a nod to Shawshank, but this came out months before Shawshank. So is that a happy accident, or with the letting out of the dirt stuff in prison?
I mean, it's at that point. I mean, it's. I think they pulled off the kind of pastiche illusion that we've talked about in previous movies there, where it's like it's all prison movies at once.
Right.
It's about knowing the conventions like the back of your hand and being able to just kind of throw them out there so that, you know, in the eye of the beholder, it could be any prison movie, even ones that haven't been made.
Yeah.
Because they're all essentially the same. And that's when, you know, these filmmakers are just on fire, I think, when they can do that. And there's only a few moments of that in this movie, but I think that is one there. But with regards to the contemporaneity of the references, again, I think it's
because Jurassic Park was just the year before, and that makes their opening credits.
And what year is Wayne's World 2? 94? 2 or 93? 93, I think.
Did they? Yeah, you might be right.
But basically, the point I'm making is that they have a Jurassic Park joke in there too, and it's really the same joke. So I think when it gets so close to the time of filming, it makes it difficult for them to come out with a parody that can actually do anything with the material.
Yeah.
It just has to be the thing that everyone knows and recognizes. Whereas even you even just go back a little further to the Untouchables, you can start to mine it for something interesting. Like, you know, exactly what you were saying about them picking it because they wanted a little time to elapse, and they also want they want to draw attention to that movie.
Right.
Rather than just reflecting what... I mean, now I almost think of that scene from The Untouchables, and this is interchangeable. And I think that's what they were going for.
Yeah.
Like, I forget which moments are in which movie, but when they do the Jurassic Park stuff, sorry, Geriatric Park, it just limits them. But this movie is thematically about movie parodies because over a third of it is set at the Academy Awards, and even before that, they set out their stall fairly quickly in, I think, the opening credits that we're going to have a lot more straight movie parodies and pastiches here. Mm-hmm. The fact that the movie is the exact storyline of White Heat almost makes me think of like Airplane, where you're actually
like
using
Airport, right?
Yeah, using the story of Airport, not just the references. You're using it to structure your screenplay, and they definitely use White Heat here.
Right, but I always like the non of the time references a little bit better. I like the stuff like, you know, the references to The Great Escape in this movie.
Yeah.
You know, being in the cooler and
you know what my favorite piece of movie satire in this movie is? And it's such a slight moment, but it just shows that the Zucker Abrams canon is at its best when it's picking out cliches and conventions from like classic Hollywood of the 50s and 60s. And it's the beginning of the Academy Awards set piece where they're giving a Lifetime Achievement Award to an actor who was in a bunch of sword and sandals epics.
Yes.
And they're putting like clips from them on screen. The most homoerotic imagery you can possibly imagine. And for those of you who don't know, that's exactly what these movies are like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then they cut to him and he's this like old withered guy in a wheelchair, and he falls asleep. And the look on his
face too.
Yeah.
Because it looks like he's barely present, you know?
And, you know, it's funny both because what it's saying about the movies that it's commenting on is very true and very funny, but also, you know, we can all think of those moments in award ceremonies where this kind of things happen, and it's always a little uncomfortable,
right?
That there's someone so old and so distant from and so different from what they're being awarded for.
Yeah.
That there is something inherent, and I just think that's where they nail it. Unfortunately, there's about another 25 minutes in that sequence.
It just keeps going.
That's the big problem here, but it never gets any better than that.
All right, well, before we go to our second break, let me ask you this fundamental question, because we talked about it, I think, in our last episode, where we said, hey, they did at least pick up this story right where the second one left off, that he's retired, but they absolutely didn't have to do that. So in your mind, should they have done that? Is Frank Drebin retired the way to go? Because I'm not saying you don't have plenty of good jokes with him in the home and the cooking of the baking and the cleaning and all that stuff.
I don't think they are good. I don't think. I mean, they're not morally good jokes.
No.
I don't even think. I don't even think.
But I'm saying it lent to funny stuff that we like with Nordberg.
I don't even
love
think it's
some Muffet.
I don't even think. I think the clash. I think that scene is funny, and the kind of the contrasts between his old life and his new life are. But so much of that is tied up on just jokes
gender
about
politics,
gender fluidity, and how grotesque it is for a man to play a role traditionally played by a woman, and vice versa. And I don't find anything funny about that idea, and certainly not the way it's executed here. So I also think, we talk about carbon dating in this movie.
Oh yeah.
None of these movies mine that kind of carbon dating, but sometimes I think it's accidental in a way that maybe they've not intended. Like, first finding Frank Drebin in a grocery store. Something about that montage feels like it could only be from the early 90s in a movie. It feels like something, in the same way when we watched Highlander 2 for a watch along, it's like there's a dressing up montage in the movie which comes out of nowhere.
The 70s.
And you're like, it's like, no clear indication this movie is made in the early 90s. And I think the grocery store hijinks montage is pretty much the same feeling. So I like the continuity aspects because, like, as we said before, they're under no obligation to create a story through line here if they don't want to. So I like the fact that it go, but then it's pointless because they retcon that Priscilla Jane is a lawyer now. So, and there's so much inconsistent. They're about to try to have a kid. I mean, he's 68, she's nearly 50.
Yeah,
it's
right?
like
yeah.
So it all sort of doesn't matter, and yeah, I don't think it was a bad choice.
Okay.
But
fair enough.
I don't think we
I guess I kind of kept thinking, wouldn't it be better if we were in his last 2 weeks? Sort of Lethal Weapon-ish.
Well, when you say that, of course it was a bad choice.
All right, let's take another break, and then we'll come back.
That slight adjustment, you have a movie that's 20 times better.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
That's all I'm saying.
This is This isn't a podcast. This is a screenwriting masterclass.
I'll take care of it in our pitch. All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be right back. If you like podcasts like I do, boy, do I have a treat for you. You need to
stay on target
and check out the Sounds and Cinema podcast. Listen as your host, sound designer and music creator Tony Parham, and co-host, musical performer and sound lover Derek Hansen, D-Rock if you're nasty, and I am, discuss all things sound related to film, television, stage, and theatrical productions. They discuss environmental sounds, bioacoustics, dialogue, the nature of communication through sound, but as an added bonus, they drink beer and try to
stay on target.
Find them wherever you get your podcasts and listen to the pure mania of a man who can charitably be described as Doug, the dog from Up, and another man with a soothing and sultry voice trying to get that man to
stay on target.
That's the Sounds and Cinema podcast. Tune in and listen to the sounds they are creating just for you. And we are back yet again, ladies and gentlemen. Tom and I are here discussing the Peter Sagal sequel, Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. So, Tom, I feel like we should get down to this. Well, do you have more to say about the prison scene before we get to our sort of final set piece? Because we haven't talked in depth a lot about the prison scene, but
yeah,
it's mostly just getting rid of dirt.
Well, and my overall feel, I was going to say one thing about the prison scene is that, like, this it's very clearly, perhaps nowhere clearer in the movie, that you can make the same jokes about the same movie conventions, and you can take out the prejudice, and it doesn't compromise the joke.
Yeah.
So all this prison stuff is shot through with a kind of homophobic, racist, the joke is always leaning in that direction. And for every single one of those jokes, you could pull race and you could pull homosexuality out of it and the joke would not suffer, is my feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my feeling, that I thought it was a shame and overall a bit of a waste, because obviously the conventions that they're pointing out are ripe for parody. Prison movies are some of the most formulaic movies out there. And it all revolves around the same, since White Heat, which is 1949, they've all basically been the same. And the fact that Shawshank Redemption doesn't break that mold, it just does something magnificent with it, I would say. Shows that this is exactly where they should be aiming, but I don't know. Like I say, nothing is uncontaminated in this. There's like the pure gag is there, but they make all.
Well, and that's part of my biggest problem with this movie is sort of that what you're discussing right now, the underlying tone, the leaning of this movie towards both race and a fear of homosexuality. I mean, then as a second layer to that, there aren't the brilliant quips and one-liners. This movie's really devoid of that, 6'3",
few and far between.
6'3" with had a mustache, 6'3", awfully big mustache. There's no those lines aren't in this movie.
And there's nothing. And
it's
when
replaced with like a midget at a urinal. I was gonna have to stay on my toes.
It sounds funny when you say it. But I don't. Again, it's like, I think one of the things I've learned a lot through talking to you about these movies, because it's easy to think that a comedy movie hangs on its jokes. But almost the opposite is true. If there's nothing in and around those jokes tying them together, you almost might you might as well not do them, almost. Like, I can think of, there are some great one-liners in this movie. I like my sex the way I play basketball one-on-one with as little dribbling as possible.
Yeah.
They are there, but there's nothing tying them into this brilliant through line, which the last movie did miraculously
so well. Yeah.
And building on those lines, turning them into something. And that's...
I liked, one I did like was the nurse at the sperm bank. Because when he comes in with the pretend broken arm, and he doesn't realize he's at a sperm bank.
Yeah.
So he's trying to explain how he got his arm, and she's assuming... So he's saying, yeah, we were just out playing ball in the
with my uncle,
with my uncle in the backyard, that kind of thing. And but her line is when she gives him the cup, and he says, wait, I'm supposed to go in there. She says, well, it's not exactly the backyard, but
yeah. Well, there you go. Like. There's a successful set of jokes,
right?
A moment similar to that where I feel like. We get these glimpses of really good comedic screenwriting, but they're all very segmented.
Yeah.
And then they say nothing about the overall quality of the movie is at the end of the Academy Awards when there's a standoff with Fred Ward and they're trying to figure out like how each of them get away. And he eventually ends up with him saying, "This is getting pretty complicated, Rocco."
Right.
And again, that's all the jokes are building towards that punchline.
That joke. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Actually,
You know-
my favorite joke, for some reason, my favorite joke in the entire Academy Award set piece is the Mother Teresa musical.
Oh, really?
I laughed out loud when that hit the screen.
Yeah, and
That
again,
really tickled me.
and that only that only supports the argument that the further back they go in cinema history, the
Right.
the better the jokes are. But because I remember just how I think it's not that those lines aren't there, but they're just so detached from the overall quality of the movie. Like they even resort at one point to just kind of panning across the police squad office and have people on phones talking to like citizens
Yeah.
calling in. And the lines that they're saying are hilarious. One of them is, "No, sir, in this state, killing a gang member's just an $18 fine. Just mail it in."
Yeah.
And
right.
it's like these are good lines, but there's nothing. They're not coming organically out of the situation,
Right.
and they're almost like writing off those moments as in the same way that they do like background gags. But it's
Yeah,
not the
right,
same
right, right.
thing. Like that has to come from. It's not an aside. It's got to be part of something bigger.
Part of right. Well, and
Um,
I also, because sometimes, for instance, when they're practicing the bomb, so they have a real Fat Man and Little Boy Oppenheimer thing going on,
yeah.
but then they tag it with Beavis and Butthead.
Which is interesting because they don't know in 1994 that we'll still know in 2021 what Beavis and Butthead is.
Right.
Because I think especially the older generation were very disdainful of that kind of comedy as kind of flash in the pan, only appeals to Generation X's kind of comedy. That it'll never last like, a good Jack Benny routine or something like that. But in fact, the opposite's true. It's like it's become timeless. It's come back again and again, and it's still
And
our
again,
reference point.
yeah.
So I never in my lifetime thought I'd see Fred Ward as Butthead in anything.
Right.
But it's interesting because it's kind of, but they never could have predicted that this piece of comedy that everyone thought was just an early 90s phase would still
Was
be
not.
as popular today
Yeah.
as it was then because because Mike Judge is a genius. Yeah. And so it's
Oh, you know what I also forgot was I thought it was so interesting that they took this pot shot. You probably don't, I don't know that you know him, but they took this pot shot at Steve Howe, the pitcher. He was a pitcher for the Dodgers
Right.
who constantly was getting into trouble for drugs and cocaine, and he was suspended like 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
And Drebin has this line about, Steve Howe and not a Steve Howe last chance,
Right.
And I just thought, I couldn't believe that the name Steve Howe jolted my memory of, oh my God, yeah, Steve Howe.
But this
And
is
then
right
I thought
in
of
is
all
right
the
in the
people
pocket.
that probably were saying, who the fuck is Steve Howe?
this is right in that 30-year pocket of your perfect memory.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I think you remember things from 30 years ago better than you do what happened yesterday.
I do. You're right.
I've talked about this before, but anyone who wants verification of this, listen to Michael recall from memory the plot of Highlander 2. He does that.
I was saying it so
he does-
unassuredly, too.
He does that opening scroll basically word for word, and he hadn't seen that movie since 1991. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say. Yeah, it's very it's. I guess we should go on to talk about the last half of the movie, which is the Academy Awards.
Which is the Academy Awards scene. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, highs and lows. Things I really like about it.
Yeah.
I love the fact that. I mean, whichever way you look at it, it's almost foolproof in terms of being a comedy satirical goldmine. There's so many jokes you can make.
There's no end in sight for the number of jokes you could make. However, like I said, this is a 76-minute long movie, and I do have a note here that said at a certain point I thought, okay, let's find an end. Wrap it up. When we go back to our fifth visual take of Leslie Nielsen rope dancing behind Fred Ward.
Yeah, so
I just kept thinking, come on, let's go.
You're not wrong. I mean, I didn't know that they wanted to do another movie and that this was a fake end to the franchise, that they were forced into that position, because I felt that they were just trying to give Leslie Nielsen like a full-on slapstick number to go out of, and I didn't begrudge them that. And I was entertained and charmed, and it made me miss him and all those things. So I felt very positive about. You're absolutely not wrong. By that, it's more that by that point, we're just so fatigued.
Yeah.
By the sequence that it does lose some of it, perhaps some of the charm that it was supposed to possess. Because it is, I know he's an admirer of Chaplin and the old silent movie greats, and I think this was just to give that full expression. So I was appreciative.
I liked all the stuff in the booth with the director.
That actor is great. I mean, again, it's
great.
Like you cast the Tomimoto from Presume Innocent.
You cast the right
guy.
What a great poll.
You cast it. That just people say his name so much in that movie. I will never forget that he plays that character. He's played so many great characters over the years. And he's excellent. And the guy who was old George in Seinfeld as the conductor too does a great kind of mime-based performance as well. Mm-hmm. And I like the Altman-esque quality of it in like having real movie stars in there.
Right.
I'm glad they didn't come up with like the ersatz Elliot Gould and Raquel Welch, and that we got the real thing.
Yeah.
And James Earl Jones is one of my favorite lines in this movie, where he's like he says, "It looks like Phil Donahue throwing up into a tuba." Just to think that he saw the script and saw that was his big line, it makes me very happy.
Cannot disagree.
And and I can see looping. They're trying to do something. They're trying to outdo the baseball stadium sequence from the first movie. It seems to me, in terms of like a big set piece with a live audience that feels
okay. I hear what you're saying.
But it's overdone. Although I think I like the fact that there's a live audience there, and that helps with helps us know when to laugh. In the same way as sitcom, and they play with that idea, and that's
that's the thing. I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, because there's so much to celebrate in this last set piece, but it is a little overbaked. So it is kind of bringing a pie out that's just a little burnt on the top, and you're hoping if you take a knife and get rid of that top, that it'll still be delicious under. So it's just singed a bit much.
Yeah,
to continue with the metaphor, but
it happens to contain, and by no means is the only part of the movie that happens to contain, for me, the most. Oh, I don't know. Now I'm saying it's the most offensive part of the movie. I just got a flash of 3 other moments that are in the same awards category.
Okay, well, why don't you give them to us, and then we'll have people vote.
instead of a pitch a sequel poll.
Yeah, right.
What's the most offensive joke in Naked Gun 33 and a third? I mean, overall, just because there's so much comedy targeted at trans people in this movie.
Yeah.
Both the fact that it's revealed that Anna Nicole Smith is a man, the fact that it's hiding behind a movie parody of The Crying Game.
Yeah.
I find really also very dishonest. So those two things working together, like basically the culmination of all the anti-trans humor in the film, but pretending that it's just poking fun at a movie that just came out that had this controversial moment in it.
Gotcha.
bullshit. The Rodney King reference makes my heart hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I almost turned the movie off at that point.
Right. Well, yeah.
And bleached my ears and eyes.
Eyeballs.
So I guess those would be my top two, but you know, you just don't get. It's like even in the sequences that you like, there's always something that is just intolerable.
A little off.
Yeah, it's just it's not acceptable. And then it ends on a miscegenation joke. Great, good job.
As always.
Which involves O.J. Simpson, which doesn't make it better.
Which doesn't, it's not helpful.
So it's really, really hard for me to kind of get over those things. And it's sad. I mean, I have such fond feelings for this movie. It's really hard for me to admit all this.
I have fewer fond feelings for it because of everything we're talking about.
Well, this is the movie that introduced me to the concept of tongue kissing.
I forgot that you had sexual history with this movie.
Right.
Yeah.
So the first time anyone, because when you're growing up, you get advice about sex or and its related acts, piecemeal from all kinds of different sources. So I don't think I'd ever heard like straight up that the line. It's like how do you? I don't remember how it comes about. I don't know what the setup is, but it's a line about like how do you kiss or how do we do that? And he says you just stick your tongue as far down someone else's throat as possible. And I was like, that's the most bold anyone has ever put that to me. And I was like, oh, well, that answers a lot of questions. It took this movie to do it.
Amazing.
So, and the other part of this, and we mentioned the grocery store montage, but the other thing I wanted to say about that was, I remember as a kid watching a Saturday morning British television program for kids called Going Live. And actually it might have been Live and Kicking by then. People who know, and if you don't, you probably, it already sounds like a different language to you. So just go with it.
As it does to me.
Leslie Nielsen, this was after all the Naked Gun movies, and Leslie Nielsen was promoting a comedy golf video that he'd made. And they showed a little... I can remember this clearly, I could remember... It was basically,
Was it with Tim Conway?
No, it was like in the era where, home video were doing a lot, they would release instructional videos with some kind of entertainment personality who tried to make it fun. Yeah. So it was just like, and I just remember like a clip of him like doing comically bad golf swings and farting whenever he hit the ball and that kind of stuff. And the grocery store montage, for some reason, everything he was doing in that sequence made me think of him in that comedy golf video.
That's funny.
So I have so many associated memories of this, but it's 2020, it's 2021, and some of these things are just not on anymore. And they weren't then, but we didn't know they weren't then, or we turned a blind eye to it, or who knows.
Yeah.
But it's so much of this movie is wrong, and I'm not quite sure why it's... Maybe you can reflect on this for me. Why is it much more wrong than the last movie? or the original Naked Gun?
I think because overall the comedy of those two movies is just better.
And more balanced, maybe? Less targeted at minorities all the time? I don't know.
I think because we talked, certainly I talked at length in the last episode about how uncomfortable I was with police brutality in that last movie. And that hasn't changed, but the movie overall is a better written movie than this movie, and I think that just helps you to forgive it. Comedically, that movie's impressive. Comedically, this movie is not as impressive.
So
it's just not as good a movie.
If it was a better written movie, do you think you would give the transphobia and
still that would be my...
But then to that point, you know, there's no... It's all tied up with the same problem, because there's no way that you get a successful joke out of deciding to take on Rodney King and the LA riots.
Yeah.
The subject matter is certainly at that point in history. I mean, how far are we away from the actual events?
Right.
Like months, years?
Months, yeah.
There is just nothing funny about that subject.
No.
Something that just occurred to me, and I not thought about it before. A big contrast from Naked Gun 2.5. Is the joke ever at the expense of someone who's in power in this movie, aside from Hollywood?
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I can think of numerous
just J.
examples.
Edgar Hoover.
But they're only doing that because it's a trans joke.
Because it's a trans joke, right?
And I'm trying to think of because, you know, as uncomfortable as it is watching...
Because that's not a joke about him in power. He just happened to be a man in power.
As uncomfortable as it is to, you know, watch Barbara Bush being brutally beaten for entire minutes of the last movie, the implication there is that, you know, we're taking her down because she's the first lady, not because she's an elderly woman. And I can think of numerous examples in the last movie, but apart from, unless you take Hollywood as an elite, and you only really do that if you're a horrible right-winger, the joke is always at the expense of people at the so-called lower end of society, that, you know, people...
you're right. You're absolutely right.
Victims of police brutality, prisoners. So that's an interesting turn for a movie that, I mean, yeah, it's interesting, like the way that the targets of this movie have narrowed to certain kinds of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you're right.
And not spread among... Like, where's all the jokes about the Republican Party here? Where did they all go?
Well, maybe they did that in the last movie and had to send up the left, the Hollywood elite.
What about, like, Newt Gingrich trying to take over Washington? I mean...
Right, yeah, you're right, yeah. That's right at this time.
Just, it's interesting to me. I mean, I don't think these movies should be politically partisan. I think the balance of the last movie, and where you're taking pot shots at both sides, when they're worthy of ridicule, makes more sense.
More sense.
And you're right about, you know, that the movie's less concerned with that. But this is a more political movie in some ways, in terms of, like, talking about political issues rather than parties.
Right, but I think that again, this is what we're running into with these older movies, is just the idea of what we thought was okay to make comedy out of back then.
I suppose it's the Rodney King
and they were just wrong.
The Rodney King moment makes me think, like, how did anyone ever think...
Let that get past.
That this was that this was a right joke to make at this time.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, but yeah, I mean, but I don't remember anyone objecting at the time. So what you're saying is clearly true.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like how. I mean, it's 30 years. You expect standards to change, thinking to change, but it doesn't feel that long ago.
Yeah.
And the LA riots had just happened, which seems like enough of a watershed moment. I guess not in people's thinking. People have to catch up to what that actually means. Like, I mean, it was a revelation.
Well, yeah, I think back then they had the complete wrong idea of what it meant.
Yeah,
so.
quite. So I think that, it's like documentaries like Made in America that, because I watched the O.J. Simpson trial from the UK, where it was largely a soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
We're not connected to it in the same way that people living in America, or especially in Southern California, would be able to go, yeah, the LA riots just happened. Of course he's going to get off.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just, yeah, these are, like, it took that documentary for me as an outsider to go, oh, yeah, he had no chance of getting convicted in that particular moment in that particular city.
Yeah,
clearly.
Right.
And just to round things off, the most disturbing moment from that documentary for me, and I wonder if it's the same for you, and it's related to O.J. Simpson and comedy, so I don't feel it's too much of a digression.
Go ahead.
In the later sections of the movie, which to me was the revelation of that movie, because I did not know what O.J. Simpson did after he got off. I'm finding out all those things. Like, I had some familiarity with the trial, with his career overall. I did not know what happened when he was, like, released. Between him being released and going back to prison. That was the most fascinating area for me. Anyway, when he moved to Florida...
You didn't know that?
No, I knew something about that, but I wasn't paying attention to what his life was like.
Oh, I see.
And it was all, like...
Did you know about the book?
I knew about the book, yes.
Okay.
What I did not know about was that he was in a reality show.
Right, yeah.
Where he would go around Florida in disguise and prank people. And the clips from that show, I swear, like, my heart stopped. It literally, like, I was chilled to the bone. But...
Right. Yeah.
It just made, like, and when I was watching him act in this movie, I was thinking, if you take out all, his personal life, it's like, well, he's just using the skills he acquired as a comic performer to make a piece of entertainment. But the idea that O.J. Simpson could creep up to you in disguise, and he was in, like, whiteface in a lot of these disguises, I remember.
Yeah.
And you would be pranked and then revealed that you were pranked by O.J. Simpson. I can't think of anything scarier.
No, yeah.
And for some reason, those clips, like that montage of him, like in the opening credits of that, the scariest thing I've ever seen in a movie. And...
All right, that is a good place to end it. My goodness gracious. Well, ladies and gentlemen... We started talking about Naked Gun 33 1/3, and we've ended on social and political politics. If you would like to solve this problem for us, find us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Send us an email to everythingsequel@gmail.com if you want to solve the problem, or just yell at us. Let us know. For Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, I am Michael Shantz. I'm from the How Dare You Awards. We will be coming to you next time with our pitches for a final Naked Gun. Say goodbye, Tom.
You might end up dead is my middle name.
All right. Until next time.